So our second reading this morning is taken from the Hebrew Scriptures. It seems like a curious choice for a reading for a Sunday morning. This is the story of David's lament for Saul and Jonathan. Saul and Jonathan have been killed in battle. Saul was at one time David's mentor and his supporter, then he became his mortal enemy, and Jonathan was his very best friend. And so this is basically an ancient world's equivalent to an obituary. It's a song of lament for Saul and Jonathan. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 17 through 27. Listen to what the Spirit might speak into your life in this reading from 2 Samuel. Then David sang this funeral song for Saul and for his son Jonathan. David ordered everyone in Judah to learn this song, the song of the bow. In fact, it is written in the scroll from Jashar. O know, Israel, your prince lies dead on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Don't talk about it in Gath. Don't bring news of it to Ashkelon's streets, or else the Philistines' daughters will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will celebrate. You hills of Gilboa, let there be no dew and no rain upon you, and no fields yielding grain offerings, because it was there that the mighty warrior's shield was defiled, the shield of Saul, never again to be anointed with oil. Jonathan's bow never wavered from the blood of the slain, from the gore of the warriors. Never did Saul's sword return empty. Saul and Jonathan, so well loved, so dearly cherished, in their lives and in their deaths, they were not separated. They were faster than eagles, stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep over Saul. He dressed you in crimson with jewels. He decorated your clothes with gold jewelry. Look how the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies dead upon your heights. I grieve for you, my brother, Jonathan. You were so dear to me. Your love was more amazing to me than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, how the weapons of war have been destroyed. May God bless to our understanding this reading from God's holy word, and to God's name be glory and praise. Amen. What we've just heard, as I said, is an ancient funeral dirge for Saul, the king of Israel, and for his son Jonathan, both of them killed in battle and mourned by David, the future king of Israel. But David is he's an awfully good sport to say such nice things about Saul after everything that Saul has tried to do to him. Saul started off as a supporter and quickly became an enemy. David had a complicated relationship with Saul. We talk a lot about complicated relationships these days. And he had quite possibly an equally complicated but much more agreeable relationship with Jonathan, his best friend. But old King Saul had been David's supporter and then his mortal enemy. And here at the end, David blesses him, the one who hated him, the one who tried to kill him. You know, in the days before newspapers, you would get a song instead of an obituary. People would write a song about you, and they would sing it at the end of your life. A nice song. David made everyone in Israel learn this song that we just read, how the mighty have fallen. And honestly, it sounds a little bit like an obituary. Not to be morbid today, but we are going to talk a bit about obituaries. It sounds a bit like an obituary, doesn't it? It brags about their military prowess. It calls them well-loved and dearly cherished. It exaggerates a little, as obituaries do, about how they were stronger than lions and faster than eagles, how in life and in death they were not separated. David was quite the poet. And here's a little exercise. What would David have to say about you? David, the poet of the Hebrew Scriptures, who wrote some of the Psalms, at least they're ascribed to him, telling the story of the life of his enemy and his best friend. What would he have to say? It's tough to tell a person's story. It's tough to sing the song of a person's life. I try to do it for every funeral and memorial service that I preach. And some of us have written obituaries for loved ones, and so we know a little bit about the difficulty of that task. Do you remember 5 years ago there was an obituary that went viral because it was so amusingly written? I used it in a sermon 5 years ago, but I'm counting on the fact that by now you will have forgotten it, because I want to read just bits of it to you again. It cannot all be read in a house of prayer, but parts of it can. This actually made the news on several news stations. And it's a little goofy, but here we go. I want to think about the ways people will remember us and the things they'll say about us after we're gone. Joe Heller made his last undignified and largely irreverent gesture on September 8th, 2019, signing off on a life, in his words, generally well-lived. When the doctors confronted his daughters with the news last week that, quote, "Your father is a very sick man," in unison they replied, "You have no idea." The obituary was written by one of his daughters, who apparently got some of his sense of humor. And she goes on to describe him as a prankster and a hoarder and a man who loved to dress up in eccentric, colorful costumes. And he played jokes on friends and on strangers. He played pranks. As a child, he gave his dog an obscene name just so that his mother would have to say a swear word every time she called the dog. He was a veteran and an electrician and a firefighter. And it goes on to say, Joe was a frequent customer of girls' beauty shops, allowing them to do his hair and to apply makeup liberally. During their formative years, Joe made sure that his children's moral fibers were enriched by both Archie Bunker and Benny Hill. If anybody remembers Benny Hill. When they began dating, Joe would greet their dates first by running their license plates and checking for bald tires. As the father of girls, I am way behind the curve here. If their vehicle passed inspection, they were invited into the house where shotguns were left clearly on display. Joe was a frequent shopper at the town dump, and he left his family with a house full of garbage, 300 pounds of birdseed, and dead houseplants. If there was ever a treasure that Joe snatched out from under you, please wait the appropriate amount of time to contact the family and then claim it. We're available tomorrow. Joe was a consummate napper. There wasn't a road, restaurant, or friend's house in town that he did not fall asleep on or in. There wasn't an occasion too formal or an event too dour that Joe didn't interrupt it with his apnea and voluminous snoring. We're almost done. Besides his beloved wife Irene and brother Bobby, Joe was predeceased by his pet fish Jack, whom we found in the freezer last week. Left to squabble over his vast fortune, real estate holdings, and, quote, treasures are his 3 daughters. No flowers, please, but the family is seeking donations to offset the expense of publishing an exceedingly long obituary. In his honor, his family suggests that you might play a harmless prank on some unsuspecting soul. Joe didn't really have a funeral. They had a viewing at the fire hall where he was laid out in a shirt with Grumpy the Dwarf from Snow White, making an obscene gesture. And the obituary ends by saying that Joe will be buried beside his wife with his pet fish. And it says, "Sorry, Mom, we tried to keep him out of your hair for as long as possible, but the ball is back in your court." Of course, there's more to the obituary, but like I said, it can't all be read here. And you could find the whole text by Googling Joe Heller. The obituary is 1,335 words. The average is 200. He sounds like a colorful character, as does the daughter who wrote it. But humor aside, I find it touching that the people who loved him really wanted to celebrate who he was. the people who loved him really knew him quite well, and they celebrated his real character. There's such affection in it. There's such fondness. There's such joy. Back to 2 Samuel. Of course, a royal funeral calls for a little more decorum than probably Joe Heller wanted. David limits his remarks about Saul and Jonathan to their very best qualities, as soldiers especially, but in Jonathan's case, as his friend. David doesn't mention the darkness that lurked in old King Saul. Do you remember the darkness earlier in the book of 1 Samuel? Where he gets so moody and so angry that the only thing that can calm him is music? It's a great story. And then once, an angry, depressed Saul even throws a spear at young David. It has been a complicated relationship. Toward the end, old King Saul felt so jealous of David's popularity and his skills. But you will not find perfect people in 1 and 2 Samuel. In 1 and 2 Samuel, you will only find broken people. You will only find people with mixed motives. You will only find people with divided hearts. People who are loved and blessed and chosen and called despite all their flaws, and whom God uses to heal the world. Joe Heller's daughter might have painted a fuller picture of old King Saul than David did. But David practiced restraint. He only dwelled on the good stuff in the song he wrote about Saul. It's appropriate. When someone dies, it's appropriate to talk about their best qualities. David makes it all into this grand poem with a repeated refrain because Hebrew's vocabulary is so small that there aren't many words to rhyme. And so in order to make poetry, they repeat a refrain throughout. And it's one that you've probably heard on the lips of people who don't even know they're quoting the Bible. How the mighty have fallen. How the mighty have fallen. The point is that people are going to say things about us. All of us. Everybody in this room is going to come to that place in their life where the people who knew them are going to say things about them and you won't be able to control what they say. You won't be able to argue in your own defense. You won't be able to explain why it was that way. There comes a place in all of our lives where the people who loved us and knew us talk about us. And they tell the world what they experienced in us. What we gave them, how we helped them. They might not speak of how we hurt them, but it'll be there under the surface. This is actually one of the great privileges of being a preacher. We're entrusted with the task of speaking the final benediction over a human life. It's usually assumed that the preacher knew the person pretty well, and they can tell the world what that person was about. It's always uncomfortable when it's clear that the preacher did not know the person well, and that has happened to me way more times than I would like. I have stood in this very pulpit twice and talked about how shy and quiet somebody was, only to find out that they're only shy and quiet with the preacher. They're not shy and quiet with other people. They made plenty of noise. What's the pastor going to say about you? If you have children, what will your adult children say about you or your friends? When they stand someday to sing the song of your life, what notes will they play? What joys will they tell? Really ask yourself, what will the world have to say? Eulogies, obituaries, they have to make some passing mention of your professional attainments, your education, your achievements, but they don't dwell on that. What they dwell on is the good stuff they saw in you, your virtues, your graces, your kindness, the way they saw the life of God being lived in you, even if the person speaking doesn't believe in God, the beauty, the truth, the goodness that they saw in you. For all of us long for God, even if we call God by another name. The people know the real stuff when they see it. Your loves, your joys. You can fake a lot of things in life, but you cannot fake love. You can't fake joy. We'll remember you for those. You know, here's the thing. I didn't know any of you 20 years ago, and you didn't know me. And you've had phases in your life that I didn't get to see. And I've had phases in my life, thank God, that you did not get to see. We don't know each other's stories perfectly. We don't know each other's stories wholly. We look at each other and we think we know each other, but we don't know everything that's there. We don't know everything that a person has been through. The joys that they have cherished, the suffering that they've known. It's all right there. We could probably ask them. But we assume we know more than we really do know. We were very different persons, all of us, 20 years ago, if we were alive for 20 years. We were all very different persons 20 years ago from the way we are today. Even if our character is pretty much the same, our circumstances were different. Our appearances were different. Our relationships were different. Our life stage, our bodies, our incomes. All these things had us saying and doing things that we would no longer say or do. When you look at an older person, you see an older person, but you don't see their story. You don't see that they too had passions, that they too were children. Inside every 85-year-old, there's a 25-year-old wondering, what happened here? Why can't I hear anymore? What happened to my feet? Why can't I walk anymore? It's hard to remember that even an old person wasn't always old. How well can anyone truly tell your story? I bet you've even forgot it yourself, much of it. Parts of yourself that you've let go. Your children, if you have children, as well as they know you, they didn't know you as a child. Very few have witnessed your whole story and known your inner life. There is a wonderful song. Musically, I'm not that crazy about it, but there's a wonderful song with good lyrics by the Appalachian folk singer John Charles Dwyer. And it says this. It's called Chorus. It says, I want the heartbeat of who I once was, who I am now, and who I'm not yet, to find their way into a chorus and sing like they were never separate. I'm going to repeat that. I want the heartbeat of who I once was, who I am now, and who I'm not yet, to find their way into a chorus and sing like they were never separate. To see the whole life that has been given to you all in one place. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be wonderful? To not be stuck in the weeds of where you are now, but to see the whole thing all at once. We forget ourselves. We forget ourselves down through the years. We put pieces of ourselves aside, saying, I'm going to come back to that someday. And we don't. We lose so much that was once crucial to us, to who we are. And we gain so much else that becomes crucial or maybe never is. It's comforting to think that in the life of God, in a place beyond time, the song of our life is written and held by God. Beautiful and full, losing nothing of who and what we are and have been and will be. Here's an exercise in gratitude for you, and I'm not saying this to be gloomy. Write your own obituary. Write your own obituary. We have a member of this church who did this. He took a class on it, and he did it, and I hope he's watching online. Can you imagine doing it? He found it very meaningful and very moving. They won't have to use it when the time comes, but it will force you to look at your life and the things that shaped you and the things that you deeply valued, the things that matter to you, the things that motivate you, drive you, the virtues you admire and exhibit. Talk about those. Tell your own story and try to do it in 200 words. 300. Maybe in doing that, you would get a new perspective on who you are what your life so far has been about, maybe where it's headed. Just try it. Perhaps you'll get a bigger sense for your own identity. You know, writing, I find, is an act of prayer. Write the song of your life. And more than that, more than writing it, make it a good song. Make the song of your life a good one, a memorable one that inspires and encourages, one that brings joy and love to our world. Let these lives of ours, that seem sometimes so boring and so caught up in the details, let these lives of ours be lived in the knowledge that they are the worship that we give back to God. They are God's gift to the world through us. Let's live our lives like the things of beauty that they are, like the song that they are. Amen.